Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome an entrepreneur from the world of human resources from Hong Kong, Preetika Mehrotra. Preetika, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ashutosh. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. Preetika is the founder of Manage Your HR. So, Preetika, before we start talking human resources, tell me about your journey and what was the inspiration to found Manage Your HR?
Right. So I have been based in Hong Kong for the past 15 years, and I am a lucky professional and entrepreneur who's able to live her professional dream of working in India while being based in Hong Kong.
Mhm.
I have about 20 years of work experience now in human resources across industries, which include logistics, transportation, maritime, and of course, technology. I'm the daughter of an Air Force officer. And I grew up, of course, all over our country. I graduated from Lady Shri Ram College, and I'm an alumni of the Stanford Senior Executive Leadership Program. I've been based in Hong Kong for the past 16 years, and I've been based here with my husband and daughter. So I started my ship management career with Bernard Schulte Ship Management, and I moved to Hong Kong in 2009 as the crew manager for the fleet managed out of the Hong Kong office. This was a tremendous opportunity where I got to learn a lot more than just talent acquisition, as the job involved running of 40 plus ships from an HR perspective. The job involved dealing with ship owners, maritime authorities, and recruiting seafarers from our various global offices, and basically maintain a pool of competent and professionally satisfied crew pool. So, in a nutshell, it covered all aspects of HR in a company, except that this was for a very regulated and a very global industry. Within the company Bernard Schulte, I was then promoted to be made in charge of their port agency business, which is called Eurasia Port Agencies. And my main responsibility was to expand the global footprint of the port agency business. I was directly responsible for the P&L of this business unit, and where I successfully implemented the expansion of the locations of the port agency business for Eurasia, port agencies, outside of Hong Kong and Singapore to other international locations. Um, After 13 years at Bernard Schulte Ship Management, I moved to a company called Stanton Chase, which is a global executive search firm. Joined them as a director, heading their APAC practice for supply chain logistics and transportation. My role was mainly hiring mission critical and operational leaders within the maritime and transportation sector. I did this role for 6 years plus before I decided to take the plunge and become an entrepreneur with Manage Your HR.
And what made you focus on startups and build tailored solutions for them?
I believe that entrepreneurs are the key to economic growth in our country. A lot of interest in startups personally, and I have a feeling that startup founders should be supported from every possible avenue.
Mhm.
If we look at the major reasons why startups fail, number three on top, and this is what 70% of the VCs believe globally, that it's one of the main reasons for a startup to fail could be the lack of having the right team members.
Okay.
So building, maintaining, and retaining a great team can be incredibly demanding on a startup founder. And that's exactly where Manage Your HR steps in.
Okay. And what are some of the key traits you look for when you are hiring for leadership roles in startups?
Yeah, the number one would be an entrepreneurial mindset, because we are talking about leadership's role within these startups, right? So somebody who's willing to put in their own skin in the game, so to say. Additionally, the cultural fitment has to be there in terms of alignment with the founder's vision and mission.
Hmm.
What is the purpose of the startup? Another thing important for in a leadership position that I personally look for, or we look for at Manager HR, is domain expertise in that particular domain, and a very hands-on person who has the ability to roll up their sleeves, start building the business from scratch, and then sort of grow the team. So the ability to hustle, so to say, is
Mhm.
is what we look at in
Right.
a leadership position
Very
and start.
interesting. Very interesting. I've been talking to many HR leaders and, of course, many search firms as well, and I've been fascinated to see how technology is changing human resource practices very substantially. How are you using technology to manage human resources, especially for the HR ecosystem?
Right. So fortunately, majority of the startups that we have worked with, or I have worked with over the
Hmm.
past years, are technology-based product companies.
Hmm.
And the problem statement that they are solving is being done via a technology solution, where, and because of that, there's a better reach, there's a better impact, and the speed of doing things. Right.
Hmm.
So the mindset accordingly from an HR perspective for these companies is also driven from a belief that more and more we should be people driven and use technology tools for HR operational work,
Hmm.
yeah, which makes the processes easier, faster, more efficient, right?
Hmm.
So I'll give you an example. Like in
Sure.
terms of hiring, we hire people, who have a technology first mindset,
Hmm.
right? Those who are agile in embracing technology
Hmm.
and who think innovation
Right.
first,
Right.
right? In HR, we are adopting tools
Hmm.
such as, an application tracking system, an HRIS, right at early stages in startups. This is not something which only for big companies and established companies anymore,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? Then the technology is also enabling us in HR to have great communication tools,
Hmm.
where remote teams can also collaborate and work much better with each other.
Hmm.
We are using online sites for our L&D activities, for example,
Hmm.
right? So, what else could I think of? I can't think of anything where
No, no
technology is not
worries.
actually touching
Absolutely.
HR as a function, you
Hmm.
know.
Hmm.
If we sort of look at, dealing with compliances and regulations, we have access to automated HR payroll tools nowadays,
Hmm.
which is a great support for a startup at an early
Well
stage,
said. Well said. But a few minutes back, you were telling me about how important human resources is and how important the right teams are.
right?
What advice would you give to founders who are setting up an HR framework for the first time?
Okay, a very relevant question, and thank you for asking me that. For early stage startups, I would suggest the founders,
Hmm.
to sort of make sure that the compliances
Hmm.
when it comes to HR,
Yeah.
right from the employment contracts are perfect from day one.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Secondly, they need to be hiring people with the right mindset,
Hmm.
who have an entrepreneurial mindset to be able to join them,
Right.
right? Again, things like be mindful of who you're hiring. Is it important to hire on your payroll,
Hmm.
or do you think an intern or a consultant would be a better fit for that particular role?
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
Right? It's important, additionally, for a startup founder to spend time on establishing and being clear about what are the values of the organization.
Right.
Because that is where your people's practice will have a start.
Hmm. Hmm.
It'll be a base for the culture of the
Well
organization,
said.
right?
Well said.
And of course, and then the last thing is what you mentioned earlier as well. Affordable HR tools is something which is very required to have a proper people's practice in
Hmm.
place from day one.
Great response. Thank you. Can you also share your thoughts, Pritika, on the importance of creating a strong employee value proposition?
Right. I'm very happy that you brought up employee value proposition. So how an employee value proposition helps any employer is that it's not only just a great tool for retention of employees, but also to attract new talent to join them.
Mm,
Right. So an employee value proposition comes about when you make sure as an employer that the workplace you provide to your employees
mm,
is a safe, collaborative, fun place to work at. Right. And
sure.
that is what is going to give you the edge over your competitors.
Mm, well said. We were just talking about the importance of setting an HR framework, but you also help startups to align their HR policies with their organizational values. Tell
Right.
me how you do this and give me an example if you can.
Sure. So the values are what I call a soul of an organization.
Mm,
Right. So along with defined business goals, the values drives the team members towards their common business goals in a very strategic manner. You're able to line your vision of your organization
mm,
by making sure that the people in your team are aligned with the values of how they're going to achieve this goal.
mm,
Right. So to give you an example, once the values are defined, we integrate those values into our HR policies. For example, at the time of hiring itself, we look at people who have similar values
mm,
as a person, so
mm,
they can identify with it better and it's easier for them to assimilate in the organization.
mm, mm.
And secondly, we communicate these values very regularly with the team members so
Right,
that focus is not lost.
right.
And I think most importantly, we as HR ourselves,
Mm,
on a daily basis, practice what we preach when
mm.
it comes to the values.
Absolutely. Well said. Well said. The other aspect I wanted to get your thoughts on, Preetika, was the whole issue of mental health. And that's a serious issue that is being addressed all over the world. How do you help startups to integrate mental health and well-being into their HR strategies?
Right. It's interesting that you bring up this point. In the latest Garner report, which a lot of us HR professionals sort of refer to,
Mm,
it clearly states that loneliness is becoming a business risk. It's not just a well-being challenge.
mm,
So I can see that mental health is getting a lot of attention now and
mm.
importance, which was
Correct.
possibly earlier not there, because we have to realize that for an employee or a team member to do their best, they need to also be in optimum health, which
Mm,
includes both physical and mental health,
right,
right?
right.
So, what we can do is we need to firstly create a very positive, supportive work environment
Mhm,
for our teams, where
mm,
where they feel, where an employee feels happy to work, to feel happy to contribute, they feel free to discuss their ideas. So it's very positive sort of work environment,
mm.
and it is important to also guide our people managers, to have a lot of empathy while dealing with their team members. Right? It's not just the job of an
Correct.
HR to have empathy, but empathy
Absolutely.
has become a part of all leaders who are
Correct.
people leaders,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
Because we spend so much of time at a workplace that we better be at a happy workplace.
Mm,
It just
mm.
boils down to a simple fact
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, startups don't really have the luxury of work-life balance, to be very honest.
Mm,
So, what we need to do is establish a better positive work culture in our startup.
mm,
Okay. And the HR in these startups have a special responsibility of the teams are smaller as well, right? So it's possible to communicate better. It's
mm.
possible to keep in touch with your team members so you pick up early signs and
Right.
are able to mitigate the risk much earlier on till it becomes a huge problem.
Mm,
Yeah. But in today's times, a lot of startups also invest in healthcare professional, mental healthcare professionals to be on a panel if
mm,
required, help our team members.
mm, mm. Well said. There's also the other aspect of conflict resolution in small and tight-knit startup teams. So how do you support a founder to be able to manage a lot of these conflicts?
Right. Again, a good question, Ashutosh. Um, so in a startup with a smaller team,
Mm,
actually, we have to encourage open communication. A lot of times it's basically small matters of miscommunication. Everybody's working hard, everyone is putting in their best, right? So, um, however, there could be slight misunderstandings,
mm,
which can easily be sorted out by simple and open communication. And when
Right.
you're talking to your people, it's important not to be judgmental,
Mm.
and give them a good listening ear.
Yeah.
Now, having said that, should you still have a conflict situation, then we have to facilitate mediation from
Mm.
an HR perspective to be able to help the founder.
Right.
It's important to address the issue, hands on, and focus on solutions.
Mm.
That is what is key.
Very interesting. Very interesting. We've spoken about a lot of things, from getting new people. We've spoken about mental health, well-being. The other important fact that comes in is training and development.
Right.
How do you approach it and how do you support leaders?
Right. So training and development, startups don't really have a budget from day one on this.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. So the whole process starts right at the time of hiring the leadership team, right?
Mm.
So
Mm.
the CXOs, the leaders you hire,
Mm.
because they are sort of domain knowledge experts,
Mm.
right? They become actually the mentors for their own teams.
Right.
They are able to identify, they are able to sort of groom, they are able to mentor. The concept of mentorship comes into play hugely in startups,
Right.
right? Having said that, even in startups now, we
Mm.
do follow a system of, proper performance appraisal systems,
Mm.
right? Where the top talent is identified
Mm.
and also their training needs. And
Mm.
then, one-on-one basis, they are sort of training programs are set into motion.
Mm. Mm. That's it. My next question is on diversity, equity, inclusion, and the whole world is talking about DEI, except more recently in the US. But how do you incorporate diversity and inclusion into HR strategies?
I think HR is the gatekeeper for diversity and inclusion.
Absolutely right. Yes.
The sort of support needed from the founder or the CEO of the organization is very,
Mm.
very important too.
Mm.
But it's a mindset that you build into your team,
Mm.
right? So the mindset has to be the right person for the job,
Mm.
not the right he or she,
Correct.
right? So when you or even having looking beyond your personal biases of a particular background,
Mm.
is what true diversity and inclusion is,
Mm. Mm.
right? So when HR drives, brings up candidates with these sort of mindsets,
Mm.
right? The business is forced to sort of reconsider their own personal biases.
Mm.
And secondly, we also sort of incorporate in our practice, the entire people's practice, that when you do performance reviews, it's purely based on performance.
Mm. Correct.
So it's a combination of both these things which help us to actually practice diversity and inclusion in our practice, in our HR practice.
Absolutely. And what you're saying is so important. Practicing inclusion and diversity is more important than mandating for it.
Yes.
Uh, Next question is that, the whole, again, post-COVID, there's been a lot of work on remote work, hybrid work, work from home.
Mhm.
How does this affect startups and management of the people?
Right. So I am a big promoter, and I'm here talking about startups, right?
Mm. Mm.
I'm a big promoter of work from office,
Okay.
very, very honestly.
Mm.
Because what happens in an early stage startup is there's a lot of cross team collaborations,
Mm.
which really can, it hampers when you are, at different locations. A
Mm.
lot of times you can just walk across to another team member and discuss things, and the problem gets solved in like no time,
Mm.
right? So, from a startup perspective, I would recommend it is always better for the
Mm.
teams sitting together and working
Right.
together.
Yeah.
Now, having said that, the pandemic has taught us that yes, it is very much possible to do so.
Mm.
And we in HR are much better equipped now by having work from home policies in place, which
Mm.
sort of
Mm.
enable us to have remote working also in place.
Mm.
So I personally believe that it should not be a blanket for a startup, but case to case basis can be taken.
Yeah.
If there is a requirement for remote working or hybrid working, it has to be person specific rather than, even for the youngsters, their own peer to peer learning is so
Yeah.
much higher.
Mm.
when they are in the organization, right? When they just meet over a cup of tea and have a general chit chat, or on a Friday decide to go for a movie after work,
mm,
that kind of bonding really helps them eventually as a team.
mm.
I'm sort of more inclined towards work from office for teams in startups.
Amazing. I agree with you completely. So my next two questions, I have time for three more questions, but the next two questions are now for you, Preetika. What is the most rewarding part of working in HR for startups?
Thank you for asking me that. The high energy, fast paced work environment that exists in a startup, it's a great high to be a
Correct.
part of that workplace.
Correct.
And when you see a business grow from an ideation stage,
Hmm.
right, to something useful where the people are successfully able to have a product which is also, revenue generating, you
Hmm.
know, and that cannot be done without a great team which you help build. I
Hmm.
think that is the most rewarding part of being a part of early stage.
Fabulous. Fabulous. I have time for two more questions. My next question is that given the vast experience you have in human resources, as you look ahead, what are some of the trends in human resources that you are most excited about?
Um, okay, there's a lot of trends. Now let me put some thought into this one. Okay, so one is, I think, sort of people oriented HR
Hmm.
rather than process oriented HR,
Hmm.
right, is something which more and more HR professionals are carrying, being mindful of, which is great.
Hmm.
Secondly, a lot of HR professionals now are also business partners, meaning
Hmm.
that they understand the business. And now this is not just limited to MNCs and very big organizations. Even in startups, the HR people are being business partners, meaning
Hmm.
have a better understanding of the business. So I
Hmm.
think it's a win-win situation for both in this
Hmm.
case.
Hmm.
I'm quite looking forward to how AI is going to assist us in HR,
Yeah.
uh, especially when it comes to things like recruitment, when it comes to more sort of L&D, which is more personalized. So I sort of I echo what KPMG says,
Hmm.
that, being digital in thought, word, and deed
Hmm.
is the most sort of exciting part of HR that I look forward to in the
Hmm.
coming years.
How wonderful. And my last question for you, Preetika, and this is for the many, many people who will listen to our conversation. Can you share an example of an organization, and I don't want any names, where an HR intervention significantly impacted the growth of the startup?
Right. Actually, I think an HR intervention affects the growth of the startup on a daily basis. So,
Okay.
put it into an example format, you
Mm,
know, we had set up HR for a early stage fintech,
mm,
right?
mm,
So, what we did here was we introduced faster hiring processes
mm,
to onboard the talent quickly,
mm,
right? We set up performance based rewards to motivate the employees.
mm,
To improve retention, we actually set up, like an employee engagement calendar, which also helped the founder keep the engagement cost under control, right? We focused on training our employees so that they also become better in their skill sets and sort of they have a career growth path within the organization, which helps a lot in retention,
mm,
right? So essentially, what we did is that everything we did enabled the fintech to grow at a really fast pace.
mm.
And today they are amongst one of the fastest growing and best doing fintechs in our country.
How wonderful. And on that note, Preetika, I just want to say thank you so much for speaking to me about your own journey. I think we covered a lot of very interesting topics when we were discussing manage your HR. We spoke about some of the common, uh, what do you look for when you're looking for hiring leaders? We spoke a little bit about technology. We spoke about the employee value proposition. We spoke a little bit about mental health and well-being, about conflict resolution. We also covered some interesting thoughts from you on diversity and inclusion, and what are some other interesting trends you foresee, including AI. Thank you for speaking to me and good luck to you.
Thank you, Ashutosh. Have a lovely day ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast. platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.